we said here that the last halacha was regarding a person who promises to bring a korban, right? It says here, person says he's going to bring a toda, and he's part of his vow is to bring the bread from maaser, which we saw he could do maaser sheni. Lo yavi nesacheha mima'ot maaser sheni. The nesachim that come with it, the wine, he can't bring from. You can't use maaser sheni money. Why? Because the nesachim is going to be poured in the mizbeach. Maaser sheni money is to be used for consumption, and the lach toda is going to be eaten. So that's a kosher use of maaser sheni money. Nesachim, or the money for nesachim, has to always come from chulin. Chulin means unsanctified, completely unsanctified. The fishnamar bahen v'ikriv hamakriv korbanot Hashem. The person v'ikriv hamakriv ki yipol hanofel. Okay, the makriv, the person bringing the korban should bring it, his korban, to God. Ad shiyu mishalo v'lo yeh bahen sad legavo klal. What he's bringing has to be entirely to God, if his for God, and it can't already be some of God's. And it can't be holy, otherwise it's part of his. Let's go on to the next parak. See, there's a new halacha over here. How do you bring a korban? We were I wanted to introduce this last week with how do people bring a korban that they said they were going to bring there. Instead of bringing an animal, they're just going to bring the mincha. Okay, a mincha is basically one of the cheapest korbanos a person could bring, right? You can bring a big. What's the most expensive korban a person could bring? That the Gemara uses it as the example. A bull, full-size bull, is pretty expensive, right? And then as the animal gets younger and smaller, it gets cheaper, right? And eventually he says not even an animal, instead of a bull or a ram or a lamb or a goat, instead he's going to bring birds, a pair of birds. So that's more expensive than, let's say, some flour. And then the most basic korban he could bring is some flour, right? Just a mincha. Hanoder mincha ma'afei tanur. So a person has decided that he's going to bring a mincha that is ma'afei tanur, one of the two baked minachos. Could be rikikin or what's it? It's forgot already. Rakik. It should be chalot. Okay, those are two words: loaves or rakik. What's the difference between loaves and rakik? Loaves are flat, still soft and spongy, right? What's the translation of rakik we saw? Is pogin, right? Spongy but flat. And loaf is shuto kamashmo. It's like a loaf of bread. No, why would it be chametz? It's chametz, but it's unleavened. No, they use water. They use poshrin and they use a lot of olive oil.
Why isn't it coming?
Because they don't let it rise. See, you missed all the shiurim at this point. Matzah means not leavened. Matzah does not mean cracker. It never did. Only the last 200 years, when Hasidim started dafka turning their matzahs into crackers, did people start associating with it. But they were lo hayav lo nivra. Even in the times of the Ramah, the matzah was still soft. The reason you make matzah into a cracker is you have some sort of crazy hakpada that otherwise it's going to become chametz, which is a Hasidic thing, or more importantly, because you do it on an industrial scale. If you were to bake matzah, Sephardic style matzahs, remember, what do you have to do once they're baked? If you want them to last, you have to freeze them. So the fact is that our matzah factories are currently working. Hand matzah factories and machine matzah factories are working right now, making cracker matzahs, which require no refrigeration. They just seal them up in the plastic binder and it lasts for a few years, right? It's crackers. If you were to make actual non-leavened, even just thin matzah, but it's soft, it will go bad unless you freeze it. So that's why we make cracker matzah. But there's never such a thing as matzah has to be. Yeah. No, a lot of spongy. Here's the point. If you take a ball of dough that is soft, right, has a lot of oil in it, and it's in a lot of water, but you do not allow it to rise and you bake it that way, it'll still be very dense. The rising action, that's caused by the leavening process, creates a lot of gas bubbles inside the tissue of the dough. Okay, it has all these micro pockets of gaseous basically of carbon dioxide buildup, right? So that's what caused the rising. That's what makes challah, for example, nice and soft. If you were to not let it rise and you just bake it, let's say, does your wife allow challah to rise in the house? She makes this. Let's say you bake it without the rising process before it rose. What would happen to that challah? Or flat, but how flat? Yeah, so that's a rakik. Even if it's thick, if you put it in a pan and make it a thick dough, it'll still be kind of hard to eat. It'll be very dense, but it's halachically matzah if you do not allow it to leaven. Well, it's denser than what you and I would have, but nowadays, by the way, what's the trick? When people used to eat a lot of gebroks and they're using matzah meal, for example, instead of flour, how would they make a cake approximate that sponginess? How do you make like we used to have a type of sponge cake or a chocolate cake on Passover that is not super dense? No, no, you're using matzah meal. What do you use? You use baking soda. How does baking soda work? What's the miracle of baking soda? Yeah, what does it do? It creates carbon dioxide bubbles within the dough or the batter, as it may be, without leavening. It's not hummutzing happening. It's just you pour this in, it just bubbles. So that's what's called a leavening agent. It mimics what actual chametz is. I know that's what I'm saying. Nowadays we have this. So when you want to make something proper, you want to make a cake that is not going to rise. Because if you make, let's say, brownies, a chocolate cake, in the recipe there's no water. It's just oil and eggs and sugar. So how's it going to get soft? How's it going to get airy inside? The answer: you use baking soda and baking powder, and that creates an action that generates gases within the cake itself. So you get an effect that's similar to leavening without the actual chametzing. So, and by the way, the word is the same way. Leavening means you actually put in some yeast or some sort and let it rise. That's old-fashioned leavening. And then there's leavening agents, which is just a chemical that makes gas happen inside the dough, and then it's also airy. So in the temple, what they would do is they would bake everything as matzah. There's except for these lachmei Torah we just discussed, that they actually says you bring some sourdough to make it actually rise. But most of the time, the menachos include the lechem apanim, which were quite large, and the shtei halechem of Shavuos we saw they're like a few tefachim thick. That was soft, in a matter of speaking. It wasn't a cracker matzah, but it was not leavened. Very important to know. So do people bake big, soft, leavened bread without leavening? Unleavened bread. Big, soft, unleavened bread. So, and we discussed this before. Remember my trip to the matzah factory? I'll tell you about it. It was different groups, so I'm telling them the story. I went to the matzah factory. Okay, so I'll tell you guys the story. Rosh Chodesh Nisan was rainy a few years ago. It was Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because Rosh Chodesh Nisan is never a Friday. It was Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So me and two other fellows from the yeshuv went to the matzah factory in Atarot one Friday morning. And when we got there at 8 o'clock or so, there had been a breakdown of basically the assembly line. The dough was put on the assembly line, and it's mashed out and put in a flat sheet and goes through the cutter, and then it gets put into the oven and it comes out the other side as matzahs, right? So there was a problem on the assembly line. They had to cut it, and the dough that was on the line had to be taken out. It was there for 20 minutes or so. It's already puzzled, so they took it out in big carts and just left it out. And they were cleaning out the machine. So there's large quantity of dough. So I took it. They said, "Oh, they can't make it matzah. The mashgiach is throwing it out." So I put it in a bag, and I brought it home. It was a big bag. It was like a bowling ball size of dough. And I had to add some water to it because the machines, they use hydraulics. When you make a hand matzah, like the Hasidim do, they use a lot more water in the recipe than, let's say, the machines do. Right? The machine matzahs use like minimum minimum of water. Why? Because they have an hydraulic mixer anyways, and a gigantic press that flattens it out. It barely needs to be kneaded. And there's very little water in there. So this ball of dough, because of its lack of water, because it was cold outside, it barely rose. And I divided it into small challah pieces, and I baked in the oven that Erev Shabbos when I got back. And you know what the challah tasted like? Well, it wasn't a normal Shabbos challah because it was just whole wheat flour and water. It was meant to be matzah. It was meant to be shmura matzah, machine shmura matzah. And even though it spent a few hours after the water had mixed to it, it was very little water in there. It was cold, so it barely rose. It was a very dense challah that tasted like matzah. Okay, so I would imagine that's what the lechem apanim tasted like.
But they don't let it rise.
They don't let it rise. You're right. They don't let it rise, but this one barely rose anyways. Okay.
They use small water.
Well,
Isn't the Mishneh-
there's a way. There is no halacha that says that you have to use very little water. You can make a really soft matzah dough if you want. Just to make crackers, it's not going to work. You should use very little water. But technically speaking, do you ever see someone make a runny dough? It talks about there's a isa that's running, right? There's some doughs that are more liquid than solid. They talk about this in Hilchot Challah, right?
Like pancakes?
Yeah, pancakes is a liquid dough, and also we make a chocolate cake. Use a liquid dough, right? That's what we call in English a ruddy dough. So Chazal allow for such a thing that you could bake bread, leavened or unleavened, let's say on a taboon or on a grill, by pouring it on. So you could do such a thing. I wanted to do this. I think I'm going to experiment with this before Passover. Normally, you saw how we bake matzah. Were you with us when we baked matzah this last year?
No.
There's YouTube videos about it. You can go see it. You know, it's a well-known thing. We make our own matzah. Been doing it for many, many years, decades now, baking matzah before every Passover. Using the basically since for 14 years now, my wife and I have been using her recipe. And basically just roll it out and put it on the grill. But I want to know if I could mix it with a lot more water and pour it onto the grill pancake style.
Matzah?
Yeah,
Is it like for everybody?
yes. Because
Oh.
unleavened, as long as you're constantly mixing and you don't let it sit for enough time to become leavened,
Why not? Why would it be a problem?
it wouldn't be a problem. Just it's normally not the way things are done. The question is it hamotzi or not? If it's a runny dough, is it bread? So if you bake it the right way, it becomes bread. But it's like it's a halachic issue. Okay, but it's certainly kosher for Passover. It might even be lechem oni if there's nothing else in there besides just the flour and the water. Okay, so back to this. Lo yavi ma'afei kupach. If he's supposed to, what? It's not tin, it's iron. It's made out of cast iron.
Cast iron doesn't stick.
Well, if you do it right, it doesn't. We've been baking matzah for many years. We're using the same grill, and the matzahs don't get stuck to it. Thank God. So I don't see why this would be any different. You know,
That's not-
more liquid. Okay, well we'll have that. I guess that we'll have to find out soon. There's only one time we did this. This is what we did that year, 2013, when there was the power outage on Asar B'Teves, which was Friday. So people didn't have challah. The ovens here are electric, right? And people definitely didn't go to the makolet to buy bread. So either they used whatever they had in their houses. But we baked fresh challah in the house. Why? Because the stove's working. The stove works on gas. And we had on the matzah grill. So we just made fresh matzahs. You're saying, wait, you had flour? Yes, we still have flour from the last year in a box, sitting on top of the cupboard. So we made matzahs for that Shabbos. Stuck at home, nothing to do. It's just a Friday with, stuck with the, no electricity or anything like that. So lo yavi ma'afei kupach. So you shouldn't bring bread that's cooked, that's baked in a kupach. What's an oven? What's the definition of an oven?
Excavated into the floor.
An oven is excavated?
Mhm.
No, I'm asking what's an oven? The definition of a tanur. Tanur has to be a kli. It's not in the ground. A tanur is a type of kli. It says an iron thing. Sometimes in the olden days, look what their ovens used to look like. It was either brick, a stonework type of thing, dome thing, like they still have in Jerusalem, some of the old-fashioned ovens, or it was iron. That's what the Rambam's talking about here. Okay, it has to be something metal and big, and the wood is on the underneath it. That's where you burn the fuel, whatever the wood. Usually it's wood, and that's how you bake it. But you can't use a kupach. Ooh, what's a kupach? Remember Hilchot Shabbos? What's a kupach? Well, spot, but yeah, but how does it work? Basically made out of stone. It has a big circular hole on top for putting the pot in, and the fire goes in on the side, right? And what's between kupach and kirayim?
Or should we put that up?
No, so it means two. Kirayim has two holes on top for two pots, right? A Flintstone stove, right? So Flintstones? Oh man, don't you know what? I can't make a cultural reference. You know what the Flintstones were? The Flintstones. There'll
It's
be a test on.
cartoon.
Yeah, it's a cartoon. Very good. It's an American cartoon. Okay. The Flintstones live in their cavemen live in the dinosaur era. And everything they do is primitive but advanced. So when you imagine their type of oven, okay. Ma'afei rafim. What's ma'afei rafim? Ma'afei rafim. That means you get some hot tiles. Rafim are tiles. Nowadays, our tiles are much more fancy than their tiles, right? We have ceramic tiles. Even then, they had certain things that are approximating it. Most of the time, when they say rafim, what are they talking about? The tiles on the roof. That's what they say. But you have other types of tiles. If you have a tile, let's say on the floor, they don't call these things on the floor rafim. What do they call them? Balatot, right? Which is sort of a newer word. Okay, rafim is the old Hebrew word. Basically, what we have on the floor, and what we have on the roof are what Chazal would call types of rafim. So what they would do is they would heat up these tiles, or perhaps they would just be sitting over the fire, and you put the bread on that. That's similar to a grill. So you can cook like that at home, but for what Torah wants as ma'afei tanur, actually has to be in a tanur. Halachic oven. What? To a certain extent. How hot? Really? Okay, so they're not good, but I'm saying ra'afim. Ra'afim were tiles that they used for cooking. I'm just going to say that Chazal called those things ra'afim. Would they use them for cooking? No. Which tiles are using? Next, I guess it was the same thing for bricks, but ma'afei ra'afim means heat up tiles and put the bread on it, as opposed to an oven. V'lo ma'afei yorata arvim. You guys know what yorata arvim is? You seen this one? It means Yorah is a cauldron, but it says the Arab one. Go to the Bedouin tents. My daughter said, she saw this happen. They bake the bread on the ground. What they have on the ground, this is amazing. There's a place in the tent on the ground. You wouldn't even, if you're not familiar with what they do, you would have walked right on top of it and burnt yourself. They have some coals right in the ground, right? A hole in the ground where it's hot with coals, and that's where they bake. And then they suddenly take a piece of wood and they put it over it, and suddenly it's blazing fire again, right? That's the Yorata Arvim, a big hole in the ground where they bake their stuff. So you can't use that. Yes, I'm saying that's you could still see it. So the Rambam's saying, he's bringing this from Chazal, of course, that when the Torah says ma'afei tanur, the two types of menachos that have to be baked in the oven, it means an actual oven. You can't bake it some other way, okay? Or on a tabun. A tabun would be as like baking it in rafim. You can't even bake it in the kupach. Kupach is technically a small oven-like structure. It's a box with fire inside, but you cannot use that for this halacha. Okay, let's see. He continues. Let's say one of the fried menachos. What's between machavat and marcheshet? What we see, they're both fried in oil. Machavat and marcheshet are both fried. What's the difference? So the machavat is shallow, doesn't have a lip. Basically, what you and I would consider a frying pan today, and the marcheshet is the deep fryer. Okay, it's sitting in oil like a jelly donut type. Make sense? No, lip. It's not deep. Yeah. So it has to be a little bit lip, just like holding the oil. Talking about you see the pictures in your book. Go back a few chapters. Shows you the difference. The marcheshet it's like swimming in oil. Deep fry. When you cook an egg or make a grilled cheese sandwich with your frying pan, you don't deep fry it, right? No. But to make a jelly donut, or when you go to the place where they can make the chips, they're using that. So that's the marcheshet. So you can't switch the two. Masha hevi videi chovato lo yatsa. He says, I'm going to bring mincha ala mahava. That was his promise to God, and he ended up bringing mincha and a marcheshes. So he brought a mincha b'marcheshes, but he has not discharged his obligation now that he put upon himself to bring in the machava. I have to drink this. Sorry about that. How's the pizza, by the way? Different brand. Moshe, you want some? Oh yeah, I have to do that. Okay, next. Zola viba marcheshet. We view machavat. Over machavat, we view marcheshet. Harezo psula. If he said about this mincha is supposed to be deep fried, and he ended up just bringing the machavat, or he switched. He says this is to be a mincha and a machava, not hare alai. Remember the difference between gavra and chefza, neder and nedava. So what happens? Hare is a psula. He said that this flour is supposed to be turned into a deep fried mincha, and it's just a shallow fried one, so it's puzzle. And also anything he said wrong. I guess if he said I'm going to bring a halot and he brought Ricky Keen, that's also not what he's supposed to do. Sorry. What's the minimum mincha we're going to see? An isaron. How much is an isaron? Torah says, V'ha omer asirit ha'ifahu. The omer, which is how much, what was an omer used for? You guys remember? Where does it say? Melo ha'omer mimenu. Everybody's supposed to take an omer. Yeah, manna. In the morning, everybody's supposed to take an omer lal gugoleth. That means every person gets a ration of one omer of mun a day, right? Doesn't matter who you are. Everybody gets the same mun. And on Erev Shabbos, you get 2 amounts, right? So that's also an isaron. It's the same thing. In the temple, they call it an isaron. When they're picking the mun, it's called an omer, and that's an asirit haifa. So the small estimation that Makbili uses and Rabbi Rabinovich say is that's about 2.16 liters. It also happens to be that that's the shear of challah. Okay, how many liters of flour does it take to get the shear challah? So they say 2.16 liters. The more machmirs say it's like so why are you asking about weight of flour? Because that's how they sell it. But the point is flour, Chazal never measured flour by weight. Flour was always measured by what? No, by volume. Volume. What we call volume. Isn't that right? Also liquids. But even though they have different densities. So we saw that the density of flour is around like 900 grams per liter or something like that. Usually. Wheat products. So it's less dense than water. And the more machmir say it's almost 2.5 liters of flour. So in the Beis HaMikdash, they wouldn't ask them how much kilo of solet are you bringing to make this korban. They look at the measurement in volume. That's a very important thing. It's only really in the 20th century that you have, let's say, halachists defining, let's say, how much matzah one has to eat on Passover, or what's kviyat sudah. They're telling you in terms of weight as opposed to volume, right? That's a very new thing. It is, I guess, it's not exactly chokvila exactly as the Rambam would have had it, or as a tour would have had it. Let's say, it's a very new idea. It's much easier to do by weight. The way they calculate the weight, it makes a lot of assumptions. I don't disagree that it's easier to do it by weight now. By the way, how do you do it by weight? Because you have a scale. Do you have a scale at home already for this? Yeah. So your wife has a scale to when she measures the flour to see if she gets the sheer challah. My wife has it too. And your postage stamps and all that. So you have a scale. Only not everybody has a scale. Businessmen have scales for measuring these things. But the way that most people and in the temple they measure these things was by volume.
How can you do it by volume? You put it in a cup?
Yeah, you had a different size cup. Because so you have a cup that's an isaron. People used to have the cup, like in the temple. There's a cup that equals an isaron, and it was a well-known thing, and people could copy that cup because they knew it to bring an isaron. They talk about a hin and a log of wine, so these were pretty standard. Just like they talk about shekels and zuz and selah and a dinar. These were common things that they used for weight. When were they using weight, by the way? What were they measured with weight? Well, everything, food, basically. Well, money meant a certain amount of precious metal, gold or silver, of a certain weight. But why were they weighing things? They'd say, I want a shekel's weight of apples. Right? A shekel's actually, there's very few. Like you need quite a lot of shekels to equal a bushel of apples, let's say. Apples or just raw grain. Before you grind up the grain into flour, even then grain was sometimes sold a lot of times by volume. But you're talking about meat. When you go to the butcher, how do they used to sell meat? Even in Mishneh times, by the weight, and how they weigh so much meat. I want, whatever it is, 5 sellas. What? A tardama, or a tartamer, right? So, or a litra of meat. So that meant a certain weight of gold. Well, the word liter comes from that, but in the old days, litra didn't mean volume. It was in the form of weight, if I'm not mistaken. It was a weight of gold or silver, right? A liter of meat. It says in the back of the books here. The Steinsaltz has it also. So that's how things used to go. No, it's a weight, I think. If I'm not mistaken. You guys see it? It's in the back of your books. Read it. It's in the appendix. Well, yeah, a lot of things used to mean one thing, and they say it elsewhere here. Yeah, a litra. See, it's the mishkal of a chatzi log.
Log is weight.
Yeah, it's weight. So, but you're telling me nowadays the word liter means volume. Okay, so there you go. So we've said we figured this out. So now the most basic mincha is usually measured in esronot. Okay, sometimes in Chazal it's esronot because isaron, that mishkal. Remember this word about mishkal? Now we're not talking about weight. We're talking about the grammatical idea of mishkal, syntax, and diktuk. Mishkal means a Hebrew word of a particular form of a vowel form, right? So the mishkal of mifal are one mishkal, right? Mishkal is basically binyan, but for things other than verbs. So in this case, the mishkal of zikaron, dikaon, all those other words like that, right? Shivayon, right? Iparon. Give me some more words like that. Kishalon. All the plurals of these words are with an ot suffix instead of im suffix, right? Zichronot. So the plural of isaron should be esronot. That's the way it is in Chazal. So how is it in the Torah? Esronim. I listened to that. It wasn't isaronim or isronot. It was esronim. So both are valid. It's a question. Zikaron, is that masculine or feminine? I think it's masculine, even though it's the plural is zichronot. You're supposed to say it. I never understood this. Some Sidurim say Zochrenu b'zikaron tov lefanecha. Okay, zikaron tov. That's fine. They say zichron tov. That's the memory of good. Doesn't make sense to say in the spichut form. It should be zikaron tov, right? Like in the Ashkenaz Siddur. Sephardic Siddurs have a zichron tov, which doesn't make much sense. Ironically, Sephardic Siddurs more often have bad grammar. Ashkenazic Siddurs have better grammar, gooder grammar, and the Sephardic Siddurs have less. They have all these like isms, like Aramaisms or slang and stuff like that, or Arabic influenced. Usually, Ashkenazic Siddurs stick more to the rules, the biblical rules. Okay, Bori Pir Guffen, as we said, that's proper grammar. The fact that their Siddurs have Geffen instead of Guffen, why not? What's going on? Why don't you just say it the right way? Okay. It's a segol. And at the end of the pasuk, it should be kamatz, like kesef becomes kasef, right? That's the rule. There's some nouns that don't follow that. Melech never becomes malech, right? I don't know, but that's the rule. Melech never becomes malech, and eretz becomes aretz even when it's not at the end. If you say the he'adiyah before the word eretz, becomes haaretz, right? There's no haaretz. So, yeah, there's exceptions, but the exceptions show that the rule exists. So a person says he's going to bring 2 esronot. See, instead of esronim, like we had in today's parsha, it's esronoth. Lavian b'kli echad. He's going to bring them in one vessel. Ve'avian b'shnei chilim, but he brought it in 2 vessels. Oh, the b'shnei chilim. His promise was to bring these 2 esronoth in 2 separate kalim. We have Yom B'Kli Echad, and he united them in one kli. Remember, in the temple they used to have I think a kli like this. The Rambam says in Hilchot Klei HaMikdash, he mentions the various size kalim they used to have there. Remember? Do you remember that? What?
What's the context?
How they used to measure volume in the temple. I'll read to you. It's in Klei HaMikdash. The first parak in 17th halacha says. It's in your books there. Sheva midot lach hayusham. Here's how they used to measure volume in the temple. By the way, they call it midot lach, means liquid measure. In English, you call this dry measure for some reason. Okay, when they talk about different volumes, fluid ounces and stuff, it's called dry measure. There's a hin. A hin is quite large. That's about 3.6 liters. Chatzi hahin, well, 1.8 liters. Shlishit hahin, a third of a liter. Remember, they're using chatzi ahin. That's why you measure the oil in the wine for a bull. A person brings a bull as a korban, chatzi ahin yel apar, right? That's the measure of his oil and his wine. So they would measure a hin and a chatzi ahin, ushlishit ahin for a ram. Every time you have a ram korban, you need to measure shlishit ahin, right? Ushlishit ahin la'ayil. Urvi'it ahin la'keves. You need a quarter of a hin in order to measure out how much wine and oil for a sheep offering, right? The log echad shamen. A lot of menachos call for a log of shemen. A log is 300 ml. It's a twelfth of a hin. Okay, it's a quarter of a shlishi tahin. That's what a log is. Sorry, it's a third. It's a third of revi'i tahin, and it's a quarter of revi'i tahin. Right? It's a twelfth of a hin, so it's a third of a fourth, or a quarter of a third. And then chatzi log. Chatzi log is about 150 ml. It's 2 reviuses and a revius. Okay. So I guess he didn't mention the saron here. They weren't measuring here. Oh yeah, and the halacha before that's talking about the liquids. Here's how they used to measure the dry things. We call liquid measure, ironically in English. What they have, isaron v'chatzi isaron. See, they have a way to measure an isaron and chatzi isaron. Ha'yisaron la'menachot v'chatzi isaron la'chalok bo mincha kohen gadol sheb'chol yom. So menachos are generally measured in terms of esronot. Okay, so this person's volunteering to bring one mincha, let's say, 2 esronot within 1 kli. So he has to bring it from home because they don't have that at the temple. Good. So what's the halacha here? Because he had specified the amounts and how it's going to be divided up, it says here, Masha Hevi Havei. So he ended up uniting 2 esronot that he said he would bring separately. Or he separated 2 esronot that he said he would bring together. Right? You get what I'm saying? So Masha Hevi, it's perfectly kosher korban, but he did not discharge his obligation because he obligated himself to bring something else. He said 2 esronot that'll remain separate, and he united them. Or he said 2 esronot that will remain united, and then he separated them. He didn't do what he said he was going to do. Shnemar kasher nadarta la'Hashem. You have to do as you promised God. That was your neder, so you have to do it. Elu la'avi b'chli echad. Let's say his promise was to bring it in 1 kli. He ended up bringing 2 kelim. If he actually didn't take it upon himself, it's not a neder. Instead, it's an adava. He says this flour is to be divided among 2 kelim. These 2 esronot will be divided into 2 kelim, and he ended up bringing them in 1 kli. Now it's actually puzzle, or the reverse. Said this is supposed to be 1 united korban, and he ended up dividing it. So it's puzzle. Yeah. Make sure you know what you said. Lo kiva'an b'shat neder. He didn't actually specify anything when he took this vow. Elo amar harei alai shnei esronot. He just said, I'm going to bring shnei esronot as a mincha. He didn't say together or not. Right? Uvishat ha'frasha kiva'an v'vishan b'shnei chilin. And then when he was actually setting aside the flour to bring the korban, he said, okay, this isaron is in this kli, and this isaron is in that kli. But then he just decided, you know what, put them together in 1 kli. 2 esronim, or esronot, into 1 kli. Harei elu kshirim, so it's kosher. Shtemar kasher nadarta, as it says, as he promised. Now, he promised to bring 2 esronot. He didn't say how he was going to do it. Velo kasher hifrashta, but not as he separated them. Separation means when he sets it aside for the actual korban. By the way, every isaron comes with a log of shemen. The usual, unless it's a specific type of korban which has is exception to this rule, for every isaron, we're going to see, of flour, which we said is how much? How much flour is that? 2.6 liters, 2.16 liters of flour. He's supposed to bring a log of shemen. And how much is a log? 300 ml. That's assuming revius is 75 ml. Nowadays, we say revius is actually 86 ml, right? Rabbi Chaim Noah's opinion. So his log is much bigger. His log is about 360, right? 360 ml. And his isaron is also about, it would be 2.5 liters or so, right?
So 86 times 4 is
360.
100 is
Okay, almost 360. Yeah. 75 times 4 is 300, right?
Yeah.
If you're adding 11 to each one, so 75, so it's 344. Okay. About that. And it turns out the Isaron comes out to how much? About 2.5. We're not using the Chazon Ish's measurements for these things. Why not? Well, we use the Chazon Ish law for these things because everything we dig up, archaeologically speaking, doesn't fit what the Chazon Ish said, including the Rambam's own measurements of wine and water. He described in terms of the currency, the drams that were around in Egypt at the time, and those are still existing today. People have them in like collections and museums and stuff like that. So it's difficult to use the Chazon Ish things for these things and say that's the way they used to do it. I know, but they didn't. It wasn't so well known how much the drams and things like that were.
You're saying it's all around museum.
Museums are the fact that these museums are like open to like people and like actually doing these things is relatively new.
From what? As a niche?
Yeah, even before that. But it's not like his what he has does not fit things that perhaps other people could say. That's why the people who were contemporaries of the Chazon Ish disagreed with him.
So why did the company do one of those stuff? It's because we just checked easily.
I do not know. But I know that for all the people who study these things, they do not take in the Chazon Ish's measurements into account. Maybe he did. He did. He disagreed, but he has his reasons. I'm just saying that no one's using them for these types of things. If you try to, let's say, go to the Temple Mount or other historical sites where the Mishkan was, and use a Chazon Ish Amma, it doesn't fit. Right? Yeah, it doesn't. Yes. Yes. Those about 48 centimeters fits. Now that we say today, we saw this years ago. The heights mentioned by the Rambam in the temple, how you go up these steps from the Azara, from into the Ezras Nashim, and from Ezras Nashim into the actual Azara, the steps are about like half an amma high each. Okay, they're like half an amma in, half an amma high, like that. They're still there today, so they more fit these more accurate measurements. Okay, let's see. Another halacha here. Ooh. Amar harei alai shnei esronot lavi b'chli echad. Okay, we said this. He actually said, "I'm going to bring these two esronot in one kli." Okay, ve'avi b'shnei chilim, and he divided it. Amru lo b'chli echad nadarta, and then they're telling him, "Excuse us, sir, you brought this in two separate kalim, but you made a promise to bring them in one." Hikrivam b'shnei chilim, and then he brought them in two different kalim. Harei psulim, he didn't listen to them. Hikrivam b'chli echad. He listened to them, and before he got a chance to actually offer in the temple, he reunited them in one kli. He fixed his neder, and now it's kosher, and it's a good thing. So it's good that people telling him this. He says, "I'm going to bring two esronot in two different vessels, and he's bringing them in one kli now. That's a mistake." They tell him, "Excuse me, sir. You said you're going to bring them in two separate kalim. You have one double esronot thing here. You have to divide it." If he does end up bringing them in two different kalim, it's kosher. But if he kept them in that one kli, he didn't listen to the people trying to correct him. Then we have the situation of two menachos that have actually become mixed up with each other. So what does that mean? What's the halacha of shnei menachos shenisarvu? You see what he says over there? So, what does he do? I think that the Makbilis is something different here. No, it doesn't mean psulim. Otherwise, it would have said psulim. He has to treat it like it. He has to do a shtick now, where if it's like two, he does it like this, and two like one. He has to do a thing. He says here, "Dinan sheim yacholik mots mikol isaron b'fnei atzmo k'sheroth." If he could somehow take a kamitza from each one still, because he knows where they are separate, because he poured it in like this. The first one into this vessel, and the second one's on top of it, so he has culminates here. That's definitely all from one. And then he takes out all of that, and he culminates as the second one. So he's fixed it. And if not, V'imlo psulo. And if he can't somehow get a kmitza from each one and only each kmitza on its own, so they're invalidated. Yeah, he's going to say it later. It's not a yesh brera ein brera. There's actually a separation between the two. He knows. Yeah, if you can't, so there's nothing you could do. Now it's possible. No, yesh means that what you took out, you just say has a din of both, or it has a din of only one and has a din of the other. In this case, it means no. The flour that you take out in this kmitza can only be the flour of this particular portion, and the flour of the second kmitza can only be of that particular portion. No. That we have yesh brera with Chazon Ish's way. We do follow the Chazon Ish a lot of times. Taking trumas and maasros, how do they do it? You say that this what? Well, besides the pruta chamura, talking about when the person lamashkichim do this, they cut off a piece of the apple and say that the matanos are here kedas l'Chazon Ish. That the part that's all the way to the east, all the way to the right, that's the truma, and the next part's the meiser, and the part that's to the east most of the meiser next to the truma is the truma gedola, and the next part, which actually cutting off, that's the meiser sheni, and it's already redeemed, right? You could do that. That's a type of brera thing, even though there's no physical disconnect between the different matanos, right? That's the type of thing you could do, but for this case, you can't. Because that's the halacha. The kmitza has to come from only its particular mincha and not some other mincha.
Maybe because the Rambam goes by angel.
The Rambam holds a brera in other places.
Midrabanan.
Rabbanani holds a brera, but also Doraisa. Ervin's always the Rabbanon. But I think saying there are Doraisas where he holds like Yesh brera also.
Oh, where?
Oh no. Don't put on the spot. I'm sure there is. There's been cases of brera, right? Basar b'chalav? What do you mean? Wait.
So if
You have to make sure it's the Rambam. But in this case, it's not brera. This is not a disputed Gemara, by the way. It's not talking about brera here. That's not what we're talking about. Talking about that when he takes out the kmitza, this portion of flour has to have come from one mincha and one mincha only. There's no way it could take kmitza of two minachos at once. They have to have the process, whatever kmitza is. By the way, how do we translate kmitza? We don't translate it. It has to come from only one mincha and only one mincha.
Thank you. Like say two of these minchas. I'm like changing. I can't explain.
No, it doesn't work that way. Korbanos has to be very specific. You can't do a korban like that.
With blood, you can do.
With blood?
If someone's doing with blood, you just put the bottom.
That's dealing with one animal. It's all one animal. We're going to see about damim shenisarvu, by the way. There is what to do. There are cases where it goes to the Yama. There are cases where it's possible. You can't do it with all damim shenisarvu.
No.
Some ways there is a trick to fix it, and some ways there isn't.
That's according to yes, but I mean you can take it and say, okay, if there's a little bit of blood that's over here, it's probably
the Rambam holds of certain cases where you could do things with the blood. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. We'll see them. It's Psulei Mikdashim, but it's like the third parak there. So we'll get to there. But right now we're talking about this. In this case, they can't say brera. You have to have a way to do the kmitza here. Yeah. Okay. You have to be able to somehow do a kmitza separately. It's going to be in Psulei Mikdashim also. The kmitzas, by the way, what's kmitza like? They say kmitza is similar to, it's like the shechita of the mincha, right? No, the kmitza is like the shechita of the mincha. Well, no, it's not. It's not kshera b'zar, and also malika is not kshera necessarily. If a zar does malika, it's not a nevela, but malika is no, it's not. If you do it in the temple, no. If you do it here, talking about if it's done in the temple, you still have invalidated the korban, but it's not like it's a nevela that's going to contaminate things. No, it doesn't make it kosher either for you. You're not a kohen, so your malika makes it so it's not a nevela. No, not necessarily, because it's not a valid korban. Nothing. It's not going to make things tummy. Okay, remember nevela, nivlasa oaf is tame, right? So that's all it does. It's just like shchita. Ironically, an animal killed in some way not with shchita is nevela. So now it has tuma. If it's killed b'shchita, but it ends up being hustle as a korban or a treifa for chulin, it's still not tame, right?
Wait, Nevela is coming?
A nevela is tame. Basar nevela is tame. Shmona shratzim are also tame, even without shchita. Okay, nevela. A nevela of a cow is tame. It's tame meat. Okay, it'll make you tame from holding it. Yeah.
Oh, that's why they call it the smart.
Well, okay. Well, but the paraduma only cures people from tumas mace of a person. The tuma of nevela and other things are removed from by mikvah. Okay, it doesn't have a 7-day period of what's 7-day impurity? Tumas nida, zav, mitzora, mace. But even those things they're removed in different ways, but not with paraduma. A person is tumas zav, and he's a mitzora. So there's a process to get rid of that tuma, which is a severe tuma, but it's not paraduma water. Okay.
At one place when the
Yeah.
Rabbi says,
Geish Brera,
"Ish Brahmi Divre Sofrim."
he says it's big. And what about the Deraisa?
He doesn't specify it. He just says, "Davar shkum Divre Sofrim yesh bo brera."
Okay.
So that it doesn't say what about the other.
Is there a cross reference there? What's the halacha there?
אבל החמישה הריני מערב על איזה מכם שירצה, רציתי אלך ורציתי לא אלך, אף על פי שרצה מי שחשקה, אף על פי שרצה מי שחשקה ילך.
You're talking about for making an Eruv. Yeah, well, yeah, okay. The Eruv, which path, where he put his Eruv to Chumin. Yeah.
Or hear about whose person should follow which or who.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Can't make the Eruv go both ways. Next. Okay, let's see some more halachas here. It's very good that we're discussing these things. Okay, we saw that's there. It's kosher. He says, I'm going to bring 2 esranoth and 2 kelim. So he says he's going to do it separate, and then they tell him, "Excuse us, you need 2 kelim for this. Do what you promised." And he ends up doing it, so they're kosher. We just saw that halacha. Person takes upon himself to bring a mincha. So now it could bring one of 5 possible minachos. How he processes it is open to him. Okay, 5 ways to do it. Either it's a neder and dava. What's the neder? I'm going to bring it. Nedava means this is going to be a korban. Remember that it's a nafkamid with achrayus and also it's kadosh. If he says this flour is going to be a korban, he has to bring this flour the exact way he says he's going to bring it. And if he just says I'm going to bring a mincha of an isaron, eventually he has to find flour. But also he has an achrayus on that if he loses what he was going to bring, so he has to bring another one. Okay. So what happens here? Let's say he says I'm going to bring minachot, plural. So minimum 2. So now he brings 2 of those 5 types. He says, I'll bring a type of minachot, one of the species. He should bring 2 minchas of the same type. I'm going to bring types of minachos. So you should bring 2 minchas of different types. It says mine mincha instead of, he didn't pluralize the word mincha, but mine is a smichus that's plural. So we should also bring 2 different types of mincha. One isaroni should make loaves, chalot, and the other should make marcheshes. He says, I'm going to bring a mincha. And he knows he said what kind of mincha. And they forgot what kind of mincha. So he has to bring 1 mincha of each of those 5 types. That's interesting. So what are the 5 types, by the way? Quick review. There's 2 ma'afei tanur, marcheshet, machavat, and soleth. Soleth means he makes some porridge out of it, basically. Let's see. An individual is not supposed to bring a mincha in 1 kli. If this kli is more than 60 liters. 60 esronot. So how much is that? 60 esronot. Well, we just said an esronot is about 2.16 liters, right? At most about 2.5 liters. So 60 times 2.5, Yoni. That's a 90. Well,
I'm reading it.
60. Yeah. Sorry. I got it wrong. 60 times 2.5 is 100. Yeah, almost 150, right? But if you say it's just 2.16, like Makbili says, 60 times 2.16 is, like you're saying, 139, 29 liter. And if you use Rabbi Chaim Noah's thing, it's about 2.5 liters. 2.5 times 60 is, I said 90. I was thinking 1.5. Yeah, well, 2.5 times 60 is 150. About 150 liters. A lot of flour. Okay, the maximum size is 60 esronoth in one kli.
How they bring this?
Normally they sell, by the way, for the matzah factories and places like that, they sell the matzah flour. It comes in a huge sack. Let's go, that's the type of thing. So they have sacks of flour. They would do it in bulk. Yeah. If somehow is promised to God is to bring more than 60 esronoth of mincha offering to God, so he brings the first 60 in one kli and the rest in the next kli. So he says, I'm going to bring 62 esronoth to God. So it's 60 in one kli and 2 in the other kli. The maximum that you could mix the mincha is 60. Anything else doesn't mix properly. What's the blila? What are you supposed to mix the flour with? What? With blula v'shemen. Also, there's poshrin mixed in, but first you have to mix it with oil, right? And like I said, the ratio is 1 isaron for 300 for a log. A log is about 300 ml, right? And if you have more than 60 esronoth in one kli, it's not going to mix well. Even if you have enough oil in the right proportions, it's still not going to mix. Okay. Aval yater shishim, let's say it's more than 60, ein nivlalin, you can't really mix it. Afal pi sheina blila ma'kevek k'moshe bi'arnu. And also we said that you don't have to actually mix it so well. Now you just have to put the oil onto it and mix a little bit. Amiru chachamim, the sages said, kol ha'ro'ui livlila, ein blila ma'kevek bo. As long as it's possible, ro'ui, you could have done it. Now, so the blila doesn't hold us back. It's not ma'kevet. The chol shein no ro'ui livlila, and anything that's not actually fit to be mixed like this, hablila ma'kevet bo. Okay, if blila is not possible, now it matters, and you can't not possible. So it's as though you didn't do it, and the korban is not fit to be brought to God. Okay, or as we wrote here, it has to be possible. I guess we'll stop there for today. We'll ask questions. No, there's no questions coming in. That's good. This is the type of thing that people deal with all the time. So, unfortunately, people have no experience with these things. I don't know if anybody who's ever succeeded in making a mincha in our day and age. However, there are characters out there who have experimented with baking lechem apanim. You heard about this? There's guys, usual types, Machon Mikdash types, so they can learn how to do it.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.